Hello and welcome to Business India with me Tarun. Talk of India-China trade generally heads towards India's humongous trade deficit with China, which jumped to an astounding $53 billion or roughly rupees 3.70 lakh crore last year. When talking of India-China trade, the figures can be mind-numbing. For example, India imported capital goods worth $540 billion between 2004 and 14 from China, with of course not so many good effects for the Indian economy which it had. Of course, there is talk of dumping of steel and other goods from China to India that are the stuff of newspaper headlines these days. On the eve of the G20 summit, we discussed today where is the India-China trade and diplomatic relationship headed. Joining me on the discussion are former Foreign Secretary Shashank, Ambassador Bhaskar Balakrishnan and Sheetal Sharma, International Affairs expert with the Jawaharlal Nehru University. I'll start with Mr. Shashank for his opening comments.
Well, there is this difficulty that China is one of the foremost exporter in the world, and therefore for India not to import goods from China would be a self-defeating proposition. And so we have developed bilateral relations strongly with China as far as trade matters are concerned. But there are so many other things which we have to keep in mind when you talk of trade. Then the question is of balance of trade. And as you have just mentioned that now it is almost $53 billion adverse balance for India. So there is this difficulty. What do we then export to China, or do we allow Chinese to invest in India so that there could be more exports from the Chinese investments in the country? This issue has always puzzled the Indian planners. And secondly, Chinese have been not only exporting, they have deep pockets, so they are investing everywhere in our neighborhood, saying that these are commercial projects, economic projects, but they all have a strategic dimension also. So India has to keep in mind that we have a ongoing adversarial relationship with China. We have not been able to sort it out. Idea was that if we can somehow build up the bilateral trade relationship, hopefully in due course, we should find a situation where personal representatives of the leaders of the two countries could come up with solutions which can be then ultimately shared with the people of the two countries and accepted by them.
I'm going across to Ambassador Balakrishnan. Sir, what is your opening comment on this issue?
Well, my opening comment would be that we should not look at only the balance of merchandise trade, where we have a huge deficit with China.
Yes.
After all, we have a surplus of trade in services, where we have an advantage over China. So when we look at the trade figures, we must look at the services plus merchandise, and then of course some invisible. So in that sense, we are not so badly off as one would assume. Now, China's big trade surplus with India is on account of their being competitive on manufactured goods. If our Make in India program takes off, then it will be only a matter of time before Indian customers start buying more and more of made in India goods. So I have a feeling that with the present government's policies of encouraging make in India and making business easier, not only will we have more competitive manufacturing, but we would also see a reduction in the trade deficit with China in the future. That's
so reduction in deficit is what Ambassador Balakrishnan is speaking of. I'm going across to Sheetal Sharma for her opening comment.
Ruchir, I would like to say that, in the present scenario of international relations, the relationship between China and India is of crucial importance for both the countries. The reason being that if you are talking in the backdrop of G20 summit, if you look at the progressive meetings that have been, or summits that have been held since 2008, you will see, that progressively the shift or the focus of G20 agenda is moving from just economic, trade and commercial relations towards more of the other international issues like environment, terrorism, peace, stability in the regions and all that. Now, within these G20 nations, India and China have a very special and strategic position in terms of trade as well as geopolitical stability. That will come on to the later part of the discussion, but talking about the trade is the sense that in 2008, when the world was facing global recession, it was India and China which helped the entire world in order to wait this tide and overcome recession, because we were least hit and China actually contributed towards stabilizing the world economy. Now, in that scenario, since then the things have changed. China is also facing a kind of slowing down of economy, because it invests either in very heavy industry or in the kind of soft toys, commodities, usable, non-durable items, where it is facing a kind of competition from other countries as well now of late. So both India and China depend on each other. Although at the present time the trade deficit in goods is in favor of China, however, progressively, when as Ambassador Saab just rightly pointed out, if Make in India initiative kicks off in the direction as it is envisaged to be, it would certainly be in favor of India in the coming years. And
okay, I take that as your opening comment. I am going across to the panel. My next question would be with regards to, should India be more strategic in what it imports? Because China mainly is an export oriented manufacturing economy, unlike India, which is largely known to be an economy which has got huge internal consumption of its own. An example would be China not only exporting capital goods in excess of $540 billion between 2004 and 14, which in fact had an adverse effect on the Indian manufacturing sector, where a lot of our small scale manufacturers effectively turned into traders. But also, if you see that they have been adopting a strategy where they even give low cost finance to Indian companies at the rate of 2%, at 1.5%, and it runs into billions of dollars with a rider and the condition that they should use the products from China even while same or competitive products are made in India. How do you look at this kind of a predatory business, what you can say, strategy adopted by the Chinese? Shashank, over to you.
Well, we are both members of the WTO, and if you have a genuine grievance, best would be to go to the dispute settlement mechanism of the WTO and have anti-dumping duties imposed on China or whatever other restrictions you want to impose. But in case you feel that simply because you are not being competitive enough,
yes,
even though you call yourself an open door economy, then it will be unfair. Then the Chinese will take you to the WTO, because after all it is the obligation of each member of this organization to see that they have a level playing field for all the trading nations. So I must say that perhaps our own manufacturers and importers, they have not studied these issues very thoroughly, and somehow they are pushing only the idea of nationalist feeling among the people, to see that yes, India should somehow, the government should reduce the cost for production for these by subsidizing the loans, by subsidizing the land value and electricity and all kinds of other utilities.
Okay.
So the point is that the government and the business community in India, they have to come together to find out what are the advantages the Chinese are having. If they are unfair advantages which they are seeking, then of course we file charges against them.
No,
but if there are things which we have not been able to sort out
ourselves. Since you have made a
ourselves.
point, I'll take the example of steel, and Mr. Balakrishnan, I would like him to answer this question. If you talk of capacities, all of India would produce say 110 million tons of steel. China produces 950 million tons of steel, which is effectively 55% of the global output. So one country pitted against the whole manufacturing competence of the rest of the world, it's still more. Secondly, it also, America as recently as 2 months ago imposed a 500% anti-dumping duty on steel against China. They cited the reason that unfair manufacturing subsidies were given to the Chinese manufacturers, which allowed it to dump steel into America. India also followed suit. India has put in place minimum import price and anti-dumping duties. Do you see that with a population of 131 crores to feed, and that China model is so far unseen in this whole world, a country which pursued export-led manufacturing for its growth, but now its adverse effects are now being seen? How do you see it diplomatically, sir? Do you see that the anti-dumping duties that India is levying is the result of the kind of policies that China adopts to see that its market expands, but what happens if it expands at the cost of domestic markets like India's own companies?
See, this whole framework of anti-dumping, we should understand clearly what happens. This is a quasi-judicial procedure. It's not the government can go and impose anti-dumping duty. There is a kind of court process whereby complaints from people who are affected by dumping, they submit complaints with a lot of technical data about what's happening in the manufacturing country and how the price is fixed. Then the DGAD, Director General Anti-Dumping, he conducts a hearing, and the Chinese can also defend their point of view. We have this happening in Brussels now case also. So after that, the process comes to a finding, and then the anti-dumping duty is levied. So it's not that the government is arbitrarily doing it.
Yes.
This is part of the WTO framework.
Yes.
Now with China, there is a problem. How do you get data in China? Access to data, what's happening on the ground in China is a problem. And the US, I'm sure, has also faced this problem. Now there, our people have to be very vigilant. Our manufacturers must be alert and look at all the products China exports to India and look out for any cases which are potentially merit dumping action. And here they should also take into account the information from other countries. Now, whether our manufacturers are really doing this, or Association of Industry is doing this, I have my doubts. I think they can do far better in watching out for dumping practices from China. Now, if they use the anti-dumping framework which is available, then I'm sure we'll have a big effect on Chinese exports to India.
Okay.
And certainly within China also that will have an effect, because what will happen in China, they have a manufacturing advantage because the labor costs are artificially determined. It's not a free labor market. Most of China's manufacturing is concentrated on the coastal areas. The interior does not benefit from manufacturing. So there are a lot of problems within China also, which may be exposed over time as various anti-dumping cases come up.
Okay, okay, that's a good point made by Ambassador Balakrishnan. I'm going to Sheetal Sharma for her comments on this issue.
I would like to elaborate on what just Ambassador Bhaskar, he said about and mentioned about the selective development of the coastal regions. The regions or the coast areas where these special economic zones came up, as a consequence, these were the 10-15 cities where the highly concentrated economic and industrial activity happened, and rest of the China is facing, a very general kind of a problem that a developing country faces of regional imbalance. There is lesser road connectivity, no proper transportation, people are unemployed, there is high degree of resentment among people that fruits of development are only going to these set of people. Now, there are many internal problems that China is facing, and there is also a kind of brewing revolt under people that this kind of state-centric economic planning and partial opening up of economy to compete with the world is also generating much desired kind of protest from the people. But at the same time, because China is not open in terms of you can access to information or the kind of data, or for example about human rights, about violation of human rights, about trade statistics, even access to information is so much under control that you actually cannot predict or talk about the general patterns or trends very effectively.
So you mean transparency of data and believability, but I think that would be the case for most countries of the third world, or so you call the emerging economies, where data cannot be relied upon.
Transparency is a different thing as compared to the availability of data. One is you do not tell. Another is that you do not have enough resources.
So you mean
to
the believability itself is
absolutely. Transparency has to be separated from hiding the data or the information.
Yes.
In, say for example, if we talk of digital India, we have genuine problems of accessibility to internet or to digital resources.
We can differentiate in a way that
yes.
they deliberately would hide data, or accessing it would be in a way tougher. I'm going across to Mr. Shashank to ask him, sir, if you see, there has been in the past 2 years a change of stance in the Indian government. Take for example, what were the #1 export of China to India in 2014-15? They were electrical machinery, equipment and electronics like mobiles. The value was about $15.5 billion. This was 2014-15. There was a conscious effort to ensure that mobiles constituted a huge number of imports from China. The government now mandated or gave tax breaks, which is ensuring that mobile units are in fact coming up in Noida. And Ravi Shankar Prasad, the Minister of Communications and IT, also made a statement to the effect that in the next 3 years or so, India will produce mobile worth 80,000 crore in India itself. Already many manufacturers, including Chinese manufacturers, are setting up plants in India. Do you see that there is a change in the way India looks at China with with what happened in the past 4, 5 or 8 years?
You know, there are two parts. One is Indian manufacturers turning into traders and just getting these products from China and putting their own labels. So that is one difficulty which we have to overcome over a period of time. The second one is that we have to make sure that the labor is properly trained. You have sufficient amount of electricity of good quality without too many variations either of frequency or voltage. And thirdly, you are giving a predictable tax regime for the foreign investor. Now, these are the issues which have been raised by foreign investors from time to time, even though some companies like Foxconn agreed at one time to come immediately and invest.
The investment didn't happen eventually.
So it has not yet happened. So this is what is happening. What I am saying is that yes, we have all these various programs, we are talking to outsiders, but somehow we have not been able to do things to square up the whole issue, which we should do. Take care. I mean, Ravi Shankar Prasad ji is doing one way, but is the whole government machinery moving in that direction?
That's an important point. Is the whole government machinery in cohesion? Ambassador Balakrishnan would like to ask you, take the example of the Samsung phone. Earlier all imported from maybe Shenzhen or some other SEZ in China, now is assembled say in Noida. But there is a change. They say you get parts en masse and just assemble them in India. So the real manufacturing still doesn't happen in India, but assembly itself will generate revenues and job growth up to some extent. How do you see this change?
Well, you know, today if you look at most of the advanced products, you will find that the components come from several countries and the assembly is done somewhere else. So this whole business of global value chain being distributed it's part of the game. Now, as far as our manufacturing capability is concerned, we have a logistics and infrastructure problems. Those are the reasons why we are not competitive in manufacturing. In services, we don't need to worry about all these logistics and manufacturing, and infrastructure. So we do very well in services because that's our brain power, our knowledge power. But in manufacturing, you need good logistics and good infrastructure. Now things are happening. I'm sure that the Make in India program will have to address the infrastructure.
One more question, supplementary would be, when you spoke of value chains, India in fact failed to integrate itself into the global value chain that the ASEAN nations successfully did in the past 2 decades or so. A case in example is the iPhone, for which the glass that is made comes from Samsung in Korea, and it is put to is assembled in China, while the core technology comes from America. So it happened, but India was missing, or India failed to integrate itself. Do you see that happening, or do you think India has missed that bus at least?
Well, we have had problems. Firstly, in the case of mobile phone and electronic items, of high technology items, there has been some reservations on the part of leading US multinationals about India's IPR regime. They are always worried about reverse engineering and IPR protection. Now, once that is taken care of, our advantage in lower labor costs, and if our infrastructure improves, will translate into benefits as far as more and more manufacturing here is concerned. Okay. Take the automobile industry. Today in Chennai, it's become a leading world hub in automobile components and automobiles. Now, the other aspect is that, Chinese goods are coming into the market in a big way. In European Union, the same thing. Now, what is happening is there is a consumer awareness coming up at the ground level. People are saying, or voluntarily, that look, when they go to buy something, they ask, is it made in China? If it's made in China, then there is a kind of negative reaction among the consumers. They themselves, if they can find a product, even if the price is little higher, they are prepared to switch over from that. Okay. Same thing is happening in India. Now, today if you go to the market and you find many more people asking, Acha, is it made in China? Then immediately they think, okay, maybe it won't last long, the quality is not so good, or they have other reservations. So there is also a possible
consumer also an issue of mindset.
Reaction.
I'm going across to Sheetal Sharma for her reaction.
Tarun, the issue is that since we have opened up the era of LPG liberalization, privatization and globalization, it has been just a journey of 25 years.
Yes.
And within that 25 years, it is only in the last 15 years that we have been able to understand and actually see the tangible consequence of process of opening up of our economy. Now, prior to that, the state of affairs in terms of research and development, in terms of investment towards infrastructure or building even say special economic zones or major cities that can be called as or labeled as production or manufacturing hubs as compared to some of the cities, say for example in China. Now, what has happened in the last 15 years, our focus has more towards been towards consumption and exporting the raw material. At the same time, the consumer market is growing, so we are more towards importing. But then to a certain extent the panel is of the opinion, yes, absolutely right, in the sense that we have not been able to cash upon the contribution that we could have made to the global value chains, in the sense that much of the the technology that we are looking for that can go from India towards other manufacturing cities or countries has been missing component in the entire sequence of manufacturing.
Okay, I take your point. We're moving to a round of closing comments very quickly. Shashank, what would be your closing comment for this discussion?
Well, we have to really put our act together, and we have started in a good way. That means that we have created a very positive impression of India's economic model all over the world, but we have not been able to implement fully. So we have another year or so, because the fiscal stimulus which is being given by most of the G20 governments, they might come under some pressure to tone it down later on, and so we may have difficulty with having these open markets everywhere, because the protection is now increasing gradually, firstly in the Western countries, and then it will move to other countries also. So the atmosphere is likely to change. So we have to keep in mind that we have a window of 1 year. We have made a lot of declarations, we have taken several policy decisions, but implementation is something which we have not
You
yet
mean
done.
the Trans-Pacific Partnership will also change things in times to come?
Well, we'll see how things go there, because the elections are on, and even the Democrats who have negotiated the deal, they are opposed to it.
Yes.
Republicans are totally opposed to it, so we do not know how it will go ultimately.
Yes.
But the point is that there is a feeling of protectionism in all the countries, and the Indian labor or technical manpower which has gone to Europe or America is facing the heat already.
Yes.
That they are under pressure to pay higher visa fees.
So things
etc.
have changed pretty much in the past 2-3 years, is what Mr. Shashank was alluding to also in a way. Bhaskar Balakrishnan, sir, what are your closing comments for the day?
Well, my closing comments are that, look, there are a lot of things have happened here. There is FDI has been liberalized, there is the tax reform, the GST has been rolled out, there is a new Make in India program, Startup India program. All these things take time to bear fruit, and I think we are on the threshold of real revival of economic growth in India. We have a huge advantage of a domestic market which many countries don't have. So I think looking forward of all these initiatives, they have enormous potential. Now, if the finance minister reduces corporate taxation next year to a level which is comparable to the rest of Asia, which is around 22% from the 30%, that will again stimulate a huge FDI inflow. So there's a lot of, our economy has been running on one cylinder out of 4 cylinders, like a car. Now we have got into the next phase of a second cylinder coming into operation, and if we have the full reforms which are required done, then I'm sure we'll have a huge increase in growth. 8 to 10% growth rate is not at all impossible.
Okay. Okay, I'm going across to Sheetal Sharma for her closing comments on today's discussion.
Tarun, I certainly see a kind of upward curve, in terms of India's economic performance in the coming years. After a lull or a silent period for a couple of years in around 2009 to 2013, the present government has actually taken some very good initiatives and has also attempted to change India's image at the international level. in which it is no longer seen as a country, where the people cannot trust because of political stability. We have a very good environment for businesses to come, investment to come and make profits, and also help the domestic economy and growth of the country. So my take would be that the effects of all these initiatives would be observable only in the next 5-6 years to come, say till 2020. However,
So you'll give the manufacturing and all that?
Yes, we are on the right track, provided the Make in India initiative, foreign direct investment comes to India, and it has been used properly in not just specific core areas, but also spreading across the region, so that there is an even development, inclusive growth.
Okay.
That helps our economy and society.
Okay. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on today's discussion. So as we see it, India suffered in the past, say about 2004 to 14, where capital good imports crossed the net oil import level also, when we imported in excess of $540 billion of capital goods. We see a bit of change with Make in India program and India committing to at least get the electronics, which were large scale imported, to manufactured in India. India did indeed miss the whole bus of so-called supply chains or value-added products in the past 15 decades, where the other ASEAN nations actually went past ahead of India. But it remains to be seen what changes are brought in the next 4 to 5 years through the Make in India program, so India can get rid of imports of things which it necessarily need not import. Let us see how this happens. We'll track this story for you here on News World India. Thank you so much for joining us on today's discussion. Thank you.